Меня зовут Oleksii Zagrebelnyi, я из Украины, и я представляю FreeZone, организацию, которая объединила людей, имеющих опыт пребывания в тюрьмах. И я безмерно благодарен организаторам данного диалога за возможность услышать и быть услышанным. За эти 3 дня я виртуально познакомился со своими единомышленниками и соратниками, потому что практически каждое слово организаторов и спикеров находило отклик в моем сердце. И прежде всего потому, что определенную часть своей жизни я провел в местах лишения свободы, отбывая различные сроки тюремного заключения, от 6 месяцев до 6,5 лет. У совершенных мною преступлений не было жертв. Все они были связаны с оборотом запрещенных законов веществ.
Сейчас, подождите секунду.
You need to accept to be interpreter, to go to the interpreter channel. Could you, Sergey, tell him to accept to be set as an interpreter? Sorry.
So is it Oleksii who is supposed to do something?
We have the English the translation interruption in the English channel, right?
Right.
So we need to flip it.
So can you hear the English translation? Is it okay?
I can hear English. I am not sure if there's anybody else in the audience that needs the translation.
No, it's fine. Okay, let us please continue.
Okay.
Okay.
Продолжайте, Алексей. Да. Да. So there were no victims related to my offenses. All of them were related to the substances prohibited by the law. And in fact, the key cause of them was my disease, chemical dependence. But the punitive philosophy of the penitentiary system, based on total isolation, all types of limitations and restrictions, humiliation of human dignity, and violations of the fundamental human rights, there was no room to analyze the causes of these offenses being committed, and a focus on prevention of repetition of crimes. I became ultimately certain that the problems I first had faced 30 years ago, and we have been discussing within these 3 days, are not going to disappear until prisons exist. Because the key problem of penitentiary systems is the fact that they exist. The concept of a prison is not only non-humane, it is extremely inefficient. The threats from which it is supposed to protect are being generated by itself. There is whole industry which is in fact not interested in extirpation of the crime, but just the opposite. Prisons, in combination with the whole punitive system, is constructed in such a way so they will not become empty any time. The key drawback of the current penitentiary philosophy is that it lags behind the processes which are going on in the society. progress in science, in economics, in social sphere makes us live, think, and build relationships in a different, in a new way. However, the penitentiary system is actually, it lives in medieval times. Now we have the 21st century, and the huge numbers of people are actually staying in cages. But the system itself is not striving to reforms. Prisons, courts, the police, they are all elements of one huge mechanism, which is not willing and doesn't plan to change. If we have a broader view, the whole state, the whole social structure and social institutions are based on the fear of prison. That's why fighting against the penitentiary system means the fight against the whole state. That's why I support not the reform of the prison, but its elimination, its liquidation. Prison as a way of punishment should be abandoned. The key issue is whether there is a need in punishment. I'm certain that there must be viable mechanisms to prevent the violations on as regards life, health, and freedom. And if we want to achieve this task, there is no need in punishment. If the causes of most of the crimes are essentially economic related, maybe it's easier to eliminate this cause instead of changing people. We should focus on eliminating these social prerequisites, such as poverty, inequality, psychological ones, the atmosphere of competition, fighting to get success, which sometimes turns into some malicious forms and leads to violence. Chemical and behavioral addictions, as well as other causes that could push people to commit offenses. Unfortunately, our current society tends to mistake the justice of a punishment with revenge. Speaking about that the punishments must be severe as much as possible, we, in fact, want to take revenge against the person for his deed or her deed. The more severe it is, the better. But it is a way to nowhere. The many years' experience demonstrated that the severity of punishment, neither severity of the punishment nor the worst conditions for executing this punishment will not prevent other people from committing crimes. That is why progressive countries start to implement a new philosophy of a criminal punishment. And we should say a couple of words on the view on the crime itself in order to understand it. There are no bad people. There are people who commit bad deeds. A human being is not being born as an offender. He is made like this by his upbringing, environment, the state in itself. A person who committed an offense must have an opportunity to compensate and to restore its consequences. The prisons must change and must become better, far from they now as the places of severe limitations and prohibitions and total isolation. So they must be the place for the people who violated the law, the place to become a bit better. A crime inflicts harm to a victim, to interpersonal relationships, to a community, and to an offender himself, herself. And if a crime is an infliction of harm, then justice is supposed to restore the justice and good relationships. When an offense is committed, we should ask a question, not about what to do with an offender, but what we should do to restore justice. These actions for restoration and not an additional harm may counterbalance this harm inflicted by a crime. The type of justice aimed at restoring justice, the system of justice which is supposed to restore justice, must start from identifying human needs and attempts to satisfy these needs. And we should start with the needs of victims. We have to remember that violence generates commitments and responsibilities, and that first of all for an offender and then for a society. The society must be responsible for victims, helping them to identify and satisfy their needs. In the same way, the society must pay attention to the needs of offenders trying to change him or her. The future is for restorative justice. And it is not about the material compensation. I'm telling about a comprehensive approach which will help the victim to return to normal life and help an offender to change without isolation, without all the negative consequences. It is now such a structure as probation shows much better result, because the repetition of a crime after probation is much less often.